to bed at 2, and it was raining about half an hour ago, and I'm living in a kind of converted loft, so Velux windows, so it sounded like hail. Every time it rains, it sounds like hail. I mean, right, interesting ideas. Fink-cycle. I think you can trademark that. It's a means by which you gather together individuals and you kind of brainstorm in a kind of controlled environment, controlled kind of way, sort of. You set the parameters so that people can conduct quite precise thought experiments collectively, and there are consequences of which is that the actual participants come up with new ideas themselves, insights in their own life related to their own work or life or anything. But also the additional advantage that these insights are perhaps useful to further a certain goal, I suppose, to assist in a certain projection. In my case, it's 2020 world peace. For 24 weeks it would be to bring Espra into existence and have 10 million people use it at the end of 24 weeks. You know, there'd be different agendas. Anyway, here's another one. I called a second time and I used a different phone number, and there is a possibility that Graham actually did call me back on my old number. And then I thought, well, why is it on this new number? Why wasn't it possible for the secretary to immediately tag that number? Surely, if we had the right system, she could just tag, and it would tag kind of my identity. It's kind of a cross between a telephone number and you know, these avatar names that you have. So in my case, it was Happy Sea Urchin. It was kind of calling, I suppose. So she should be able to tag that. So the telephone number associated with that kind of mesh identity, that particular identity, that face I had. That was the context in which I was calling her. So she should be able to tag that. In the same way you can tag like web pages, you should be able to just tag people. You should be able to tag anything, everything that you engage. It's kind of record, but it's not really record. It's yeah, kind of record, just tag. In addition to that thought, you've got the idea that we actually, part of the Esper system attacks, don't like the idea of tax, but actually pays for the infrastructure, the actual physical infrastructure. I'm talking about the telecommunications industry. So we might actually be able to provide them an alternative funding stream. So in the same way that BT kind of like have their telephone line rental, I think that you could probably have something like that. But I think that the useful thing about this is that there is kind of like common standards or something. Standardization of certain technical conditions, and I think that's why the trains were good, because they standardized that and the original telephone communication lines. There are certain things that I think are more efficient if we kind of standardize it. I think actually, if you want to go back in history, I think it's China. I think it's the oldest country, I suppose. 221 BC, I think it was. The guy standardized the language, the written form of language, Chinese, written script, and the wheel axle gauge. So it was communication in physical existence, with wagons and so and the language by which all these different people can speak, all the different dialects. Well, that's kind of what we need globally, perhaps. Esbra. Right. Yeah, and it's not just two things. It's you've got probably a seven. And this idea of reputation and trust maps and so on and so forth sounds valid. Okay, another thought. We have Tav, potentially a genius, potentially. But the only way that it can be is if people actually participate and kind of see the genius of it, the insight into it, and then just try to make it happen. It's not so much his genius, but ours collectively. So there's no point fighting with it, and there's no point kind of arguing with it. The idea is that you just apply everything that you possibly have ever thought, and try to align it with, for example, in this case, 24 weeks. And it just makes you slightly rejig how it is that you've thought about things. So you're not just imposing your own ideas, but you're being sensitive to the new context, the new requirements, and therefore new ideas come up. Right, and this is the biggest idea now coming up. What was if I wrote a script? Okay. Wow, I'm actually planning to do this, going into Saatchi and saying, okay, this is a bit bizarre. Can I speak to Graham Fink? They'll ask, okay, who's calling? And then you say, logo. And okay. And then, will he turn up? Will he go, wait a minute, this is interesting. Will he go, oh, not again. Another person turn up, saying they're called logo. No, but I think it's kind of curious. Okay, if he doesn't turn up, hand over a script. The script says, the person that goes in says their logo. And what happens is he does turn up in the script, and then the person doesn't talk. So he meets this person down in the foyer, and the person doesn't talk. What a curveball. So the guy's like, what? What would this person do? Maybe communicate. He obviously wants to communicate even though he's not talking. This guy called Logo, but he's not saying anything. Now, of course, that's not practical. So then the short story continues with the second part, which is effectively that it's kind of a nice idea, but it's not very practical. And that's kind of postmodern, and we're kind of going into meta now. And Graham, when he's reading this, goes, okay, that's mildly amusing. It's another curveball, do you see? It's meta level, we're talking about how impractical it is, and that's in the short story. Graham's written down in the short story, like, okay, I'm reading this, and I'm thinking it's not particularly practical. But it could be. At some stage. If you get enough, I mean, logo, for crying out loud. If it works well, it could be used. I can see it being used in several different ways. And the best way for me would be to advertise silence. And there are very few ways of doing that in any kind of remarkable way. And I think somebody called Logo, who has a vow of silence, would be one of them. Oh, by the way, I don't drive a Porsche. I ride a Porsche. Anyway, it's not going to be me who's Logo anyway, probably. But, brilliant ideas. A potential genius. I would suggest my video, what is it? Happy Sea Urchin, and it's the Taurus Whisper tourist whisper.